Tonight's programme was recorded a couple of months ago in Liverpool. It's presented by Susan Hitch.
Good evening. I'm Susan Hitch. I'm here in Liverpool at Radio 3's Festival of Free Thinking with a live audience in conversation with a real free thinker, Bill Drummond. He's an artist, a musician, a writer, a king of cultural anarchy. As a musician, he zoomed across the genres from an early solo country folk album in 1986 to a series of bands. Big in Japan, the Justified Ancients of Mumu, the Time Lords, they're such good names. And finally, the KLF, which sampled its way into pretty much inventing ambient house and that mixture of rave and crowd sounds which became Stadium House. More good names. On the one hand, there was a slightly whimsical wit. As manager of Echo and the Bunnymen, he sent them on a weirdly wide-ranging tour. But it wasn't random. If you looked at it on a map, it traced out a pair of rabbit's ears. On the other hand, there was in-your-face provocation and lots of noise, spraying the Brit Awards ceremony with machine gun blanks, and then dumping a dead sheep labelled, "I died for you." Did I mention the bad puns? KLF were huge. They were cult and popular. And in 1992, they announced their retirement. And here's the really startling bit. They deleted their entire back catalogue, all the recordings. Remember that, because we'll come back to it. Meanwhile, Bill and his old collaborator Jimmy Cauty set up the K Foundation. And in 1994, they awarded the prize to the worst artist of the year, chosen by a public vote from a shortlist which was exactly the same as the Turner Prizes. Rachel White-Reed accepted the Turner Prize inside the Tate and then took the K Foundation prize on the steps outside. And, I should add, gave it all to good causes. But imagine the headlines. And in August that year, Drummond and Cauty topped them. They burned £1 million. They did it in a bonfire on the Isle of Jura. It took 67 minutes and it caused an absolute furore. Bill Drummond is the man who burned £1 million. But, ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to hear any more about that because in 1995, Bill and Jimmy Cauty resolved not to talk about it for 23 years. You have a decade to wait. Nowadays, he's become a very distinctive writer, direct, observant, conversational and exact. But all the time, in a sense, he's been circling back to thinking about music, making it, writing about it, and most recently in his new book, 17, which is essays and a memoir, and of course, characteristically, polemic. But here, I'm going to hand over to Bill Drummond himself to talk about what he's thinking about now.
Thank you very much. The History of Music, Part 19. That's the title of this talk. What parts 1, 2, 3, 7, 11, 13 and 17 were are almost irrelevant to this talk. That said, I want to start by reading something that I wrote almost 3 years ago and was taken from The History of Music, Part 17. This is it. All recorded music that has ever meant anything to you or me or anybody else is speeding its way to irrelevance. The whole canon of recorded music that has been stockpiled over these past 110 years is going rotten, rapidly losing any meaning for anybody except historians and those that want to exploit our weakness for nostalgia. The very urge to make recorded music is a redundant and creative dead end, not even an interesting option, fit only for the makers of advertising jingles, ringtones, and motion picture soundtracks. The sheer availability and ubiquity of recorded music will inspire forward-looking music makers to explore different ways of creating music, away from something that can be captured on a CD, downloaded from the internet and consumed on an MP3 player. And the very making of recorded music will seem an entirely two-dimensional 20th century aspiration to the creative music makers of the next few decades. They will want to make music that celebrates time, place, occasion. There may be those that want to keep the craft of recorded music alive, but we will think of them in the same way as we now think of those who work with bygone art forms irrelevant in tomorrow's world. I can't wait to hear the music that is being made in 100 years from now. These notions keep me awake at night with excitement. So that is me done with the quoting previous parts of the history of music. From here on in, it will be strictly part 19, made up of fresh thoughts, only marshalled in the last few days. There is no way that I want to hazard a guess at what the music in 10 years' time, let alone 100 years, will sound like and mean to us. We will have to wait and hear. Instead, I'm going to give a brief skim through the salient turning points as music has evolved over the past 131 years. You may think it a highly subjective skim through. I accept your parallel history of music, part 19, might be totally different to mine. In 1876, to hear music, you had to be able to play an instrument or sing yourself. If not, you could listen to other people playing or singing. All music that was written or performed was conceived to be played or listened to in a specific context. That could be religious music to fit the religious calendar, or ones marked to celebrate the major milestones in life, birth, marriage, death, or songs sung in the workplace to make the workload seem lighter or the hours speed by, or regal music to be used while crowning a new monarch, or martial music to stir our sense of nationalism in times of war. This can literally be music to march into battle with, or just music to have a good old knees up on a Saturday night. Remove the context from any of these examples I have given, and the music loses so much of its potency and meaning and becomes something else altogether. On a surface level, the music stays the same, but our relationship with the music changes. It is our relationship with music that defines what music is, not what the composer dreamed up or the musicians thought they were playing. So that was in 1876, and everything that had gone before. In 1877, the American inventor Thomas Edison created a device he named the phonograph. It was a wax cylinder, and on it he recorded himself reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb." His recording was not musical, but that one technological development would have more influence on the music of the 20th century than anything else that had happened in the 19th century, be it the music composed by Beethoven or sung by cotton pickers in the slave plantations of Old Dixie. 10 years later, another American, Emil Berliner, took Edison's idea and ran with it. In 1887, Berliner patented his gramophone. That is gramophone with a capital G. On this, he could play flat, circular record things that he had also invented. And on these flat, circular records, Berliner was having music recorded, not just himself reciting nursery rhymes. By 1892, he was selling these records and his gramophones to play them on. This was the moment when music could be contained within a physical object that could be bought and sold. Thus, the record industry was born. A small aside that I would like to make here is, within a few months of the first record and gramophone being sold, the Musicians' Union was formed in Manchester. From around the turn of the century up to the First World War, there were three towering composers from the Western classical tradition making their greatest work. These three were Sibelius, Stravinsky, and Schoenberg. If you were to read the historical achievements of each of these three, you would learn that they, in their different ways, completely took apart how music was made and put it back together again using scales and sounds and methods never heard by Western ears. On a personal level, I have been a great fan of recordings of the music that they composed in those years. At the same time as Sibelius, Stravinsky, and Schoenberg were being revolutionary geniuses, there was an Italian tenor who sang no new groundbreaking music, but stuck to the tried and tested canon of popular operatic arias. Unwittingly, this singer was far more revolutionary than my three heroes. He was Enrico Caruso, and between 1902 and 1921, when he died at the age of 48, he had made over 260 recordings. These recordings sold in millions around the globe. Caruso was the first superstar of the new century. What Caruso did was change how vast swathes of the human population related to music. In every continent, people were buying gramophones and records and listening to them in their homes, in their own homes. This was changing all the rules that music had lived by since whenever music was first created thousands and thousands of years ago. People could listen to the Caruso records day or night, or at least until the neighbours complained. They could take the gramophone into any room in the house. They could even take it out into the garden if they had one. For all the revolutionary genius of Sibelius, Stravinsky or Schoenberg, they changed nothing about the way their music existed and was communicated to its audience. What they were doing could have been done in 1876. Enrico Caruso left them all standing. From here on in, all forms of music that existed anywhere in the world were helpless to the charms of the fast-evolving recording technology. Suddenly, any music from any era or from any part of the world could be recorded, and these recordings could be played whenever the owner of the gramophone wanted. Music that previously would only be heard at coronations or marching into war or on a bandstand in a park or Parisian nightclub could be heard wherever. People began to collect records, have an almost fetish-like relationship with the physical objects. All around the developed world, our relationship with music was completely and utterly changing, and the vast majority of us thought this was fantastic. From a political point of view, it was total democratization of the art. We could all hear the greatest performances of the century in our front rooms. No need to be at La Scala or the Bolshoi or a whorehouse in Basin Street, New Orleans to hear the greatest music the world had to offer. It did not seem to matter that we could never relate to music again in the way people had done only a few decades earlier. In the 1930s, John Lomax, the American musicologist and folklorist, started to crisscross the United States with a portable recording machine in the back of his car. Everywhere he went, he would record the folk songs being sung by the poor, the imprisoned, the outcast. Music that no one in cultured society would have ever bothered with before. Music that had been here today and gone tomorrow, or passed down from generation to generation, was captured for eternity on Lomax's machine. This music would be collected as treasure for the Library of Congress. Now that people had gramophones or radios to hear recorded music on, nobody needed to create their own folk music anymore. The irony was, this machine that was responsible for folk music's slow death was going around the country to record it in its death throes. I, for one, am eternally grateful that Lomax did what he did, even though it marked the end of a line that had gone on for thousands of years. By now, the Musicians' Union were becoming fearful that the fast-developing recording technology would make working musicians jobless. They were right to be fearful. More and more people were choosing to listen to professionally performed recorded music rather than the shoddy and amateurish live performances of local musicians. Fast forward a couple of decades to the mid-1950s. A teenager walks into a small recording studio in Memphis, Tennessee. He wants to have himself recorded singing some songs for his mother. This lad had only ever sung in public a few times, and even then it was as an amateur. Any aspirations he had to being a professional singer would have been mere daydreams. The owner of the studio heard the boy sing and thought he had something and signed him to a recording contract. I guess you've already guessed that the teenager in question was Elvis Presley, arguably the most influential musician of the 20th century. The difference between Caruso and Presley was that Caruso was already a highly regarded opera singer before his voice was recorded. Before Elvis walked into the Sun recording studio, he was a nobody with no obvious talent. Around this time, something else was happening. The long player, which we later learnt to call the album, was fast becoming the format that most people listened to recorded music on. On this long player, up to 40 minutes of music could be contained. On the old shellac 78s, we could only get a few minutes on either side of the disc. Going to fast forward again, this time mid-60s. Around about then, two incidents took place that were to symbolize yet another massive shift in our relationship with music. Each of these incidents happened on separate continents and in totally different disciplines of music. One was in Canada, the other in England. In 1964, a young Canadian classical pianist who had already made a name for himself in concert halls around the world decided, for various reasons, to never play as a soloist in concert again, but dedicated himself to making recordings. This pianist was Glenn Gould. The vast majority of the music he chose to record was music composed in the pre-recorded music era. 18 months later, in 1966, a young English beat group who'd rapidly become the biggest thing since Stalin, the first beat group to fill sports stadiums, even Elvis did not do that, made the decision to never perform in concert again. The beat group was the Beatles. The difference between Glenn Gould and the Beatles was that Gould wanted to record his interpretations of old music that he considered too intimate to be exposed to the concert platform, whereas the Beatles wanted to create new music that could only ever exist as a recording. For both of them, to go out and attempt to play their music live in front of an audience would have compromised the music, thus make null and void the complete raison d'etre of the art they were making. There had been pop record producers and avant-garde composers who had used the recording studio as their primary musical instrument before, but Glenn Gould and the Beatles were the first two major artists that made the decision that what they did as artists was from then on only going to exist as recordings. Before that historic point in the mid-60s, recorded music's prime reason for existing was to promote the live careers of music makers. Recorded music had been made so that the listener could have the illusion that they were actually listening to the musicians playing in their front room, or that they were at the concert where it was being performed. But 1966 was, to use the now tired cliche, a tipping point. Now, I was actually just going to say a tipping point, but a friend of mine read through this. He said, can't use the word tipping point. That's just the ultimate cliche. Anybody that's talking about the American politics now, they always talk about the tipping point. But I wanted to keep it in. From here on in, or at least until the end of the 20th century, more and more of the music performed live was only done so to promote recorded music. We now judge the careers of almost all music makers by the albums they had made, whether it was Herbert von Karajan, Miles Davis, Bob Dylan, Fela Kuti, or whoever the rock and roll sensation of the moment was. Thus, all ambitious young music makers aspired to get recording contracts so they could be allowed to make albums. The recording of and the subsequent release of an album gave complete validation to their ambitions. The whole of the worldwide music industry was based on a business model built around the recording and selling of albums. Radio stations, music magazines, concert tours, music videos all existed for one reason: to sell more albums. It was in nobody's interest to question the restrictive elements of the album format too closely, while the business model still worked, and we still loved to own them. Very few of us noticed that the physical restrictions of the album format was turning all music into almost exactly the same thing. from wherever the music on these albums came from in the world, or whatever tradition, be it classical, jazz, world rock, pop, etc., it all ended up as recorded music. We could walk into a major HMV or Virgin megastore and choose from upwards of 300,000 albums. Every type of music known to mankind would be represented. And every year there were thousands more of these albums being recorded as our tastes became more refined, or we stumbled across undiscovered continents of music. How could we ever tire of it all? But this sense of limitless choice was an illusion. The reason why all this music from every corner of the world, from every musical discipline, was becoming the same thing was that it was all brought to us in roughly identical lengths, equalized within the same narrow band of frequencies, broadcast through the air to our ears via similar electronic speakers. Close up, all this music may have sounded different, but take a few steps back and you notice how similar and one-dimensional it all is. The technology that had evolved through the 20th century to record and produce music had morphed it all from just being a convenient and marketable format into one mega, all-encompassing genre, that of recorded music. The relationship that a listener might have with any piece of recorded music was almost the same. Be a middle-aged connoisseur listening to Herbert von Karajan's recording of Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, or a 13-year-old girl in 1996 listening to the first Spice Girls album. We built and bought shelves to keep our collections of vinyl and CDs on. We took pride in what these growing collections that we invested our money in said about us, in the same way as the content of bookshelves did. There was no reason that this should ever stop. By the time the new century was dawning, the iPod was being launched along with iTunes and numerous file-sharing sites. This changed everything. This was the biggest development in the history of music in the past 100 years. We could now download from the internet with a few clicks of the mouse any piece of music from the entire history of recorded music we thought we might want, and plenty more that we didn't want. All of this could be stored on the iPod in our pocket to be listened to whenever, wherever, while doing almost whatever. The album as a format was now meaningless. This thing that we'd used to measure and judge the music makers of the last 5 decades no longer had any real purpose other than historical. The music that we owned no longer said anything about us, as we could now own everything without investment from ourselves. The groaning shelves of vinyl and CDs were redundant. Music was just something that made the bus ride to work or the jog around the park more bearable. Something used to fill in the uncomfortable silences or blot out the racket of real life. The breadth and depth of meanings that music once contained was fast draining from it. Art, like religion, exists to give life meaning. When any art form loses its meaning, it no longer has any real worth, no longer has a function other than something to gather dust in the museum. There are those that have thought of the iPod as little more than the modern equivalent to the wireless set. They are wrong. The wireless unwittingly promoted the sales of records. The iPod does away with ever having to buy music again. There is another facet to my argument. Recording technology has so evolved that any kid doing a GCSE in music can record an album and stick it up on their MySpace for the whole world to listen to. The holy grail of the recording contract and all the validation that comes with it is a thing of the past. Every busker in every street has a CD to sell you. The democratization that some so long for has undone the whole thing. The business model that has sustained a worldwide record industry is imploding faster than the cultural commentators can write their blog on the phenomenon. All of this is great news for the forward-thinking music makers working in the next few years. The flip side of all I have just gone on about in the last few minutes means music is now in the process of being liberated from the shackles of the recorded music genre. These forward-thinking music makers will not want to make music that can be downloaded off the internet or listened to at any time, any place, while doing almost anything on a future version of the iPod. They will want to make music that is about time, place, and occasion. They will want their music to reach parts of the soul that words and images have always failed to do. Nothing can commune with the unknowable like music. But most importantly, they will want their music to have meaning beyond something to fill in the background while people get on with the drudgery of life. So that is my history of music, part 19. If I'd written it tomorrow, it may have been totally different. Tomorrow, I might have noticed the flaws and holes that are already blindingly obvious to some. As for the history of music, part 23, that is being written by someone else altogether. Thanks for listening.
Bill Drummond, thank you very much indeed. And in a moment, I'm going to open this to the audience here in Liverpool, who I'm sure have comments and questions for Bill. But I wanted to ask my first question first. You're not famous for sitting on sidelines and not doing anything about things. You are yourself a forward-thinking music maker, now liberated from the shackles of recording. What are you doing about it?
This thinking that I've just been talking about here started kicking in about the year 2000. I have an old Land Rover. I still got it. It's a beat-up old Land Rover. And I should also add in here, when I was a kid, I used to sing in church choirs. I used to sing in a school choir up until my voice broke, and then I wasn't interested anymore. But choral music had always meant something to me. Back to the Land Rover. So 2000, 2001, I'm driving this Land Rover down some roads near where I was living. Somebody had snapped the aerial. There's nobody to talk to. Didn't have the CD player on. Just me, myself, the Land Rover, and the Land Rover engine. And I loved the sound of this Land Rover engine, the diesel engine. And I was getting in just this, listening to the sound and listening to the other sound. And the more and more I was listening into the sound of the Land Rover engine, I started hearing these voices, and they got louder and louder. And these voices were singing, but they weren't singing any melody or there was no rhythm, there was no words. And after a while, it sounded like there was 100 Vikings. I mean, I knew it was in my imagination, but it was like 100 Vikings all go, ah, along with the Land Rover engine. And then I could hear, like, really kind of beautiful, like, choir boy voices singing along in harmony with the wind blowing through the wing mirror. And this kind of built up. Now, over the coming months and years, this became a regular thing for me. I'd hear this, and I didn't tell anybody else about it, but it was a regular thing. And sometimes when I was working, I'd take a break from what I was doing. You know, if something wasn't happening right, instead of putting a cup of tea on, I'd go out into the Land Rover, drive down a few roads to hope that I'd hear this choir in my head. Now, this choir took on a name, and there was no reason behind this, although you can ask me about it maybe, called the 17. This internal choir. And at some point, I decided to see if I could take what I was hearing in my head out there. Now, I did this. I tried it in different ways. And it kind of worked. And I assumed I was going to then take this choir and make a recording and do the normal things and go out and perform. You know, and I'd got a bunch of blokes who were singing, like, and there was 17 of us. But something changed, something to do with what I was talking about earlier. I decided, no, when it worked best was when it was just the 17 of us together in a room doing, and I started putting scores together for the show. I wasn't just trying to copy what was in my head. But it was a sort of year zero thing. And from there on, for the past 3 years now, I've been doing this 17 thing, this choir called the 17. And every time I do it, it's with a different 17 bunch of people. There is never an audience. So it's just me and this group of people. And the scores that have been put together, not just by myself, but by other people, they're always time, site, occasion specific. So
Thank
Bit
you.
of a long answer, sorry.
That's great. And now I've got an additional question to that. You've got a record as a kind of provoking. I mean, you're actively, imaginatively interested, controversial. You provoke people. I remember looking at you in the past and thinking, this is a provocation. You, K Foundation, put up billboards saying, abandon all art now, which were themselves art. And it was a wonderful kind of stirring up of things. But you didn't actually abandon all art now, and apparently didn't want to. I have a feeling that this is different this time. You really think you're out there doing the new thing and that people will and should follow?
I've never set out to provoke. That's never been... I'm a very driven person, I know that. And I wake up in the morning. Well, lots of people have ideas at night. I know there's something missing in my head. Lots of people have, they may be chatting with friends down the pub. Oh, wouldn't it be great if this happens or that happens? Now, the bit that's missing in my head is I'll get up the next morning and do it. And sometimes they're not thought through. So sometimes I will spend X amount of money in taking adverts or whatever that says abandon all art now, without even actually thinking, well, what do I mean by this? Yeah, am I going to abandon all art? Am I going to... And it'll be too late. By the time it's done, it's too late.
But this one's different.
No, I'm not saying this one's different. I can't tell, I wouldn't know if this one's different. I don't think this is any more immature, less mature, or more mature. I wouldn't know. But what I was talking about the 17 and why I wanted to keep this, I don't think that what I'm doing with the 17 is the future of, well, obviously not the future of rock and roll, but the future of anything. But I think it's me, a middle-aged man, responding to where I'm at in my head and dealing with things. I think there's going to be 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-old music makers out there now who are not going to want to make their music to something that's on an iPod that you can just flip through, that is, and have a MySpace and all of that kind of stuff. They're going to want the music to exist in different ways.
I'm Susan Hitch, and you're listening to Radio 3 Nightwaves with my guest Bill Drummond in Liverpool's Free Thinking Festival. Now, over to the audience. Any young music makers out here to comment? That gentleman in the third row.
For a young music maker or somebody actually getting into music, it seems as though the technology has actually broken that connection between, feeling that you've actually found something that you were passionate about. I mean, if that connection is ultimately broken, how can that ever be? Technology will always advance. It won't regress.
Of course, technology always advances. And if the electric guitar had not been invented, Jimi Hendrix wouldn't have grown up thinking, and he said, yeah, I want to make this sound that goes, wah! The electric guitar had to be invented to do that. The pianoforte had to be invented for whoever to write those sonatas. And it's never the musician, it's never the artist that actually creates that thing. The drum machine was invented by some technologist, scientists in Japan somewhere, not imagining that Kraftwerk or whoever were going to come along afterwards and do this stuff with them. So we have the iPod. And that is going to, once the iPod was there, once we no longer needed to have records, it changes everything. It changes the way we are going to make music. So there's no going back. There's no, and I don't want to go back. I don't want to hark back, even though it's kind of natural for people to somehow think, oh, the music when I was young was somehow better than it is today, or it was better 200 years ago than it is today. That's almost an irrelevant thing. Things are going to change. Things are going to evolve. And I think what has happened in the past 10 years is going to radically change the way we think of music. And music might no longer be this important cultural thing that it has been over the past 50 years. If there's not vast amounts of money to be made out of it in the way that there has been over these past 50 years, it might sink. It might just go back to have a position that it had in culture before all that happened.
Gentleman 2 rows behind you.
Hi. You were saying that musicians would find this new freedom by using these technologies, but then you were saying that
say again, musicians
these new developments has created a new climate for music making.
Yeah.
But then you also say about how they'd maybe not use iPods and not use new technologies. But if they don't use them, then how would they ever reach this new way of making music? The fact that they can reach global audiences would mean that time and space isn't so important. Maybe it's less important because they've got to reach people on the other side of the world as well.
Of course, artists of any type will use whatever technology they can grab is around them.
Yeah.
But I think the concept of world audience, that whole thing is a thing that's going to become a dated thing.
Yeah.
The idea, that's still in the shadow of what the Beatles achieved or Elvis Presley achieved or massive global reach. I think that's going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah, but these things are good as well, because these things gave us a language. Without the Beatles, people wouldn't have this idea of these ideas and this common knowledge of what to do.
I think what you're talking about is becoming passé. Now that we can all have a laptop at home and make these tracks in our head, it says, wow, this sounds fantastic, and I'll stick it on the internet and people will discover it and I could be whatever. It's gone. It's going. It's disappearing.
Lady up there in the back.
I think that would be quite good if we become less obsessed with recording music and about collecting it and being materialistic about it. But won't it come back to that again? If the live music comes out and we end up all going out, and that'd be really good. But if I go out and see something, then I phone somebody and say, oh, what I saw yesterday was really good. I'll somehow find a way of getting a recording of it for you. If people get back into live music, I think that'll be really good, but then it will be cyclical.
Go on, you.
No, there's a good question here about the context in which you see this happening, this newly made music.
One element of what you're saying, it's a well-known fact, over these past few years, since the turn of the century, ticket sales have gone up and up and up for live acts. That is a sign of that thing happening. Now, I actually think a lot of people will go to those festivals, will go to those concerts. They're not bothered about buying the CD. They may download some tracks. They may download every track done by that person. They go and see them. Next day, wow, that was great. I saw whoever it was, Leonard Cohen, he's been over here. Download all the Leonard Cohen tracks. They maybe listen to it a bit that week. It's gone. People do not have that same relationship, or less people are having. Some people will hold on to it, but it's less and less.
Gentleman in blue shirt there.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's something in what you're saying about immediacy, really. And I didn't know whether you felt that, in your experience, a lot of the craft of recording music is about kind of getting it right and fixing what you're doing to an idea you have of what things should sound like, and the spark kind of gets lost. And I wondered if that had been like the flavour of your experience of kind of the rigmarole of recording, really, and whether you're maybe reacting to that, the involvement in the business of music rather than the kind of joy of creating music, and whether that kind of ties in with what you were saying about the part of your personality, which is like saying, okay, here's my idea, don't think, do it, execute it, basically. And are you I know you're saying you're not promoting anything, but do you feel that there's something coming along whereby people will kind of get a bit fed up with all the clutter that's actually around the ideas and just get on with executing the ideas?
I'm going to respond to the first thing you were saying, bit first, and there's two elements to that. I know for me, the most emotional, the art that's had the biggest impact on me in my life has been recorded music. From in my teenage years when I'm 13, 14, that has had the biggest emotional impact on me. Even though, I've read a ton of books and they've had a huge impact on me, and obviously the visual arts have as well. But I know recorded music was what, when I was living in, a Nowheresville type town, that's what introduced me to this outside world. Now, something else you touched on, within classical music, what has happened over the past few decades, recordings have got better and better and better, and the edits that are done to make especially, like Paganini was considered the greatest violinist ever. Now, if we were to actually hear a recording of Paganini now, I'm sure it would be riddled with all sorts of imperfections, all sorts of stuff that just wouldn't be acceptable in a classical music recording now. It's more studied, it's more, and it feels like it's been bled of the soul of whatever that original piece, and you just know if you'd heard Paganini playing it, it'd be completely something else. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, but that was one of the things that came into my head.
I've just got a quick question about 17.
Yeah.
Please explain the contradiction, which is you will perform it once,
Yeah.
you will record it
Yep.
once, and you will play it back once.
Yeah.
How does that work?
well, how does the technology work, or how do I square the ideology? Because I'm not very good with ideology, and I'm not. And like I said earlier, we will use whatever technology we have there. And yes, I will have laptop, microphones, some recording technology, and put a piece together. Everybody hears it, and these are people that have never sung before, maybe haven't sung since they mumbled along at a school assembly, and put a piece together, and we play it back to them, and using no, reverb, digital delays, just the voices of the people there, and hopefully every time, and it doesn't work every time, but near enough every time, they are stunned and think, wow, that's great, and then we delete it.
But, Bill, are we going to be allowed to broadcast it once? Because I'm sitting here as a Radio 3 presenter thinking I've got a future of describing music. It's not going to be fun.
No, and of course, I know, well, no, the 17, I hope will never be recorded. Somebody put something up on YouTube. Of course, YouTube's there. And I went to all sorts of lengths to get it taken down from YouTube because I didn't. But I know that's like, and I'm trying to hold back the tide on that one. But and of course, radio. You're never going to be out of a job. And of course there is.
Bill, I'm relieved.
There is going to be music. There's going to be radio stations forever, I guess. And people presenting the music. But just in the same way as there's going to be people doing mosaic and pottery forever.
I'm on the margins. I'm afraid we have time for just one more question, and I'm going to ask it. It's the question you sort of invited earlier, which is, what is it with the number 17?
Okay, when I started doing this, I have a bit of a habit with numbers, a bit of a history with it. And I wasn't aware of this until people started pointing it out. Okay, for the 17, when I started going public with this choir called the 17, and people asked me, so why is it called the 17? And I better come up with a reason, okay? And one of the reasons why I gave, and this is true, I remember as a kid standing in the kitchen where we lived in Scotland, and I was by myself, and the radio was on, and the presenter on the radio, so it had been the Light programme in those days, said, we have the new long player or LP by the Beatles, by that singing, or the beat, whatever he said, and I'm going to play. You're going to be the first people in the world to hear a track from this album. So suddenly I thought this is important. This was like the first man in space, or it's like a major cultural thing. So I thought, I better stand and listen to this. And I hadn't heard anything by the Beatles. I heard the girls in my class at school talking about the Beatles, but I hadn't. So he played this track, and the opening line was, "She was just 17. You know what I mean." And I'm thinking, I don't know what you mean. And as the record came, I kept on thinking, and I was only 11 at the time, or 12, and what does he mean by this? What does he mean? And so that was, and from that point on, I had a mental tick. Every time I heard a piece of music, a record that had within the lyric 17, I go, there's another one. There's another one. And there's just been hundreds over the years. So that's one thing. Another bit to it. 16 as an age is kind of sexy, but it's not staying out all night. It's kind of 18, adult responsibilities. You can join the army at 17, but you're not allowed to kill people until you're 18. You can vote at 18. You can get married without your parents' consent at 18. You can get a mortgage at 18. 17 is this dark period in between. Now, this is a kind of a blokey thing, I think, but it's when blokes are most likely to get into dark music. Whether that's... could be Glenn Gould, actually. For me, it was a band called Van de Graaff Generator, but it could be Nirvana, it could be Bartok. It's got to be, that's when you get into, not girl-friendly, dark music. It's maybe that. But there's another reason, maybe. There is a choir from Oxford who specialise in early music. I'm a big fan of this choir. This choir is called the 16, and maybe I just wanted to go one better than
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to you, our audience here in Liverpool, and to you, our audience at home, but especially to our guest, Bill Drummond.
Tonight's Night Waves was recorded in the autumn at Radio 3's Free Thinking Festival in Liverpool. The presenter was Susan Hitch, the producer, Eliane Glazer.